My God. Terry Funk is still a character. He's still working too. He's older than me.
Yeah, the last I heard though of Terry, he's not doing well these days.
Isn't he? Oh shit.
Yeah, his
Is,
mind is starting to go apparently.
how about Dory?
Dory's still doing okay from what I
Yeah.
understand.
Because I heard just the opposite, that Dory was having some mental problems too. But well, Terry calls me Sonny.
Well,
He always says, Sonny. I said, Terry, I'm Jim. I call you Sonny. What are we going to talk about, Hannibal?
your career. If you're good to go, I'll just jump into it and we'll start.
Whatever you want to do.
Okay. I'm gonna record this and air it after.
Okay.
This is Hannibal from thehannibaltv.com, and today we have a wrestling legend from the Killer Bees and many other teams over the years, AWA, WWE, all over the place. Jumping Jim Brunzell. How are you, sir?
Very good, Hannibal. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you on. I've had your partner Brian Blair on a bunch of times, so
okay.
The fans have been asking for
him. Sleeping. He just got in from Florida, so he's sleeping a little bit now.
Okay. Well, I understand you went to wrestling school for Vern Gagne's school. How did you get accepted into that? Because it was very difficult to become a wrestler in those days.
Well, Hannibal, if somebody would have told me at age 17 that I would be a pro wrestler for 25 years, I would have told them they were crazy. The reason being, I didn't wrestle in high school. I played football, basketball, and track. I went to the University of Minnesota as a walk-on, as a wide receiver, and my quarterback was none other than Greg Gagne, son of legendary world champion Vern Gagne. So Greg and I became very good together in terms of, we became good friends, and he was a good quarterback, and we used to, spend the summers together. And then he wound up transferring from the University of Minnesota because they switched him to safety, and he wanted to play quarterback. So he transferred to Wyoming, and he finished his career there. And I stayed at Minnesota and wind up, playing more than I thought I would, but wound up trying out with the Washington Redskins in 1972 at a free agent tryout. Didn't make it, so I came back, was going to go to school and finish my degree. I had like 32 credits, and then Greg called me and he said, hey, my dad wants to know if you want to be a pro wrestler. And I said, Jesus. I said, I don't know. And he said, well, he's going to have a camp. And then he mentioned Ric Flair, who was a private school heavyweight champion from Wisconsin, and Ken Patera, who just got done competing in the Olympics in Munich, and Bob Bruggers, who was an ex-football player in the NFL and also a great athlete at Minnesota, and then Khosrow Vaziri, who was the Iron Sheik, the Iron Schnook, as I call him. And he was from Iran, and he was a Greco-Roman, wrestler. And Greg and myself, so we started this camp. Little did any of us know that our camp, our group, would have phenomenal careers in pro wrestling. Take Bob Bruggers. Bob was in the plane crash in North Carolina, the same one that Flair was in, and he wound up not being able to wrestle again. So he was, lucky to be alive. And then Khosrow and Rick and myself, and Kenny and Greg, actually, we all had careers that, were 15 to 25 years in the business. I wrote a book called Madlands 5 years ago, and that actually tells a story of, some 5,000 matches I had over the course of that time. So, I had a great career. I had, a number of great people that I worked with. It started in Kansas City in 1973. I teamed up with Mike George, and we were the Central States Tag Team Champions. And then I moved to back to Minneapolis, and they put Greg and I together, and we were the High Flyers for 10 years. And then I went to WWF 1985, and they wound up putting Brian Blair from Florida together with me, and we were the Killer Bees and had pretty doggone good success, for 3.5, 4 years. So that's it in a nutshell.
Sergeant Slaughter tells a story from your camp that he apparently came and they were doing amateur wrestling and he beat everyone in amateur wrestling, including Ric Flair and Billy Robinson. Do you have any recollection of that day?
The only thing I can say to that is I know that Sergeant Slaughter doesn't smoke, but he must have had some sort of a herb in his breakfast that morning, because I never remember him beating anybody out of that group, let alone Billy Robinson. Jesus God.
Yeah, he definitely told that story, and I found it strange too because, as you mentioned, Ric Flair is a former state champion too, and I'd never heard of Sergeant Slaughter having an amateur background, and apparently he wasn't even a real Marine. So I don't.
Well, Bobby Remus had a great career, and he did that, Sergeant Slaughter gimmick to the unbelievable, but he was a great worker, and he had a hell of a career. But I honestly, I can never remember anybody coming in and beating, anybody, let alone everybody. So I don't know. Maybe you think he did. I don't know.
Now, do you have any stories about Ken Patera? We've had him on this podcast a few times, and he's very popular, very controversial fellow. Was he always like that?
Kenny and I go way back, and I always called Kenny the last angry man. And I remember he wanted to get an award from the Cauliflower Alley Club that, is a national professional wrestling association that meets once a year in Las Vegas. So Brian Blair, my partner, who was the president of the organization, Cauliflower Alley Club, he said to me, Jimmy, he says, what do you think we should get Kenny as a gift or, an award? And I said, let's get a trophy and have a middle finger like that in bronze, and then have the writing below it saying, the last angry man, Ken Patera. and Brian says, oh, we can't do that. So, yeah, Kenny's been a real character. Oh, God. I remember we were in the Richfield, Cleveland, and we had, can't remember what, it was on Thanksgiving, so it must have been one of the big pay-per-views. So he and I came in from a different town, and he and I split a room that night. And during the course of the night, I heard him get up and go to the bathroom about 3 or 4 times. And the last time I heard it, he was vomiting, and I said, oh, Christ. So in the morning, I get up and we're going to the Coliseum there. I can't remember the name of the goddamn whatever it was, but it was a pay-per-view. And I said to Kenny, I said, are you okay? And he said, oh, God, he said, I'm sick. I got the flu. So little did I know, I get to the arena and we get dressed up, and I said, geez, Patera, sick. I think he's got the flu. And somebody said he had 12 white Russians at the bar. So that's why he was sick. He didn't tell me that, but that was why he was sick. But, Kenny's a good guy, and he's a character. He used to call my phone, and, Kenny likes to drink, and he would have these, he'd leave messages on my phone that were just, well, they were hilarious to me, but my wife didn't like them because he was, F this and F that. And then he wasn't too fond of too many ethnicities, so there was always that line that he'd crossed into being a racist, and it was just amazing. And then I told him, I said, I said, you can't leave those messages on my phone because Mary listens to them. So then he had a snoozeful one night and he called up and left a message to Mary saying, Mary, I'm sorry I left all those effing messages on the phone. So yeah, Kenny's a character. I just saw him about a month ago. I stopped over there and he had gained some weight. He went up to 358 pounds, and I think he said he lost 60. So he told me he quit drinking hard liquor. So I know it was 10 in the morning, and he was starting on Miller Lite and his second tin of Copenhagen. So I know he was on his way.
Were you in the AWA when he had that incident at the McDonald's?
Yes.
What do you know the inside scoop of what happened there?
Well, Saito had been drinking and they were hungry. So they went to McDonald's and they tried to go through the drive-through and they said that they were closed. And Kenny saw them dumping out hamburgers that were pre-made and probably there too long. So he goes out and, he picks up a 30-pound boulder, great big boulder, and throws it through the front glass window of McDonald's. So they go in the car and they go back to the motel. And of course the police come and kick down the door and spray them both with mace. And they had a heck of a, they were lucky they weren't shot. If it would have been current, they would have both been shot. But so, Kenny, wound up thinking that he could beat this thing, and he wound up doing 2 or 3 years in prison. And I think Saito got deported, but that's my recollection of what happened. And there's not too many people that can throw a 33-pound boulder pick it up over their head and throw it through a
right. Because he claims it was a disgruntled employee.
Yo.
Now for Ric Flair, when you knew him back in those days, was he always the partier?
Oh God, always. He was, I got to tell you, he went out for the University of Minnesota football team, and he was there for 1 or 2 practices, and then they said to him, they said, you can't be on the freshman football team. He said, why? And they said, you're not enrolled in school. So he was trying to play football without even being enrolled in school. And he had gone to that private school in Wisconsin where he met all these rich people from Chicago. He knew the owners of the Blackhawks and a couple other people. He was a real character, and I'll never forget some of the tales that I know of Rick, and you can't really repeat them, but he was a character, and he was a big whale when he went into this wrestling business, because the rest of us were minnows, and he was a whale because this business was made exactly for him, and he took advantage of it, and threw everything, into the wind, and he sacrificed everything, his whole life, for this business. And consequently, he lost. I mean, he lost his family and 2 families, and now he's I think he's married again.
I think he's on his 5th wife, actually. So 4.
Yeah. So, he hasn't changed a bit. And, he's 70. He's a little older than me. So I think he's 72. And I can't. You got to hand it to him for still being in this doggone business, Hannibal, because he still has manipulated himself, and so he's still involved. And the storyline's horrible. I mean, so you know what they want us to think, that he impregnated one of the girls that is competing against his daughter, Charlotte. And I thought, oh, Jesus, God Almighty, when I saw that on the TV, and I thought, oh, Rick, and he did that little dance and, smile. I thought, he's got to be, 72. God bless him.
Still probably the most entertaining person that they have under contract.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, well, he more power to him. He's still making a decent living. I don't know if he's saving any money, but who knows?
Now, for the Iron Sheik, I understand when he started, he wasn't as eccentric as he ended up being in later years. What was your recollection of the transformation of the Iron Sheik over the years, because you've known him for a long time?
Well, I can say that I sort of contributed to his downfall, and I'll let it go at that. But Khosrow was, a very strict Muslim when he first started wrestling. Or in the camp, he didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't swear. Sex was, only if you were married. And then little did I know that during the course of the first 10 years, changed him so radically that you never even knew it. And then all of a sudden he became, he was drinking a case of beer a night, and he was, smoking and doing other, street drugs. And it took its toll on him. He had a hell of a run in New York, and I worked with him in Charlotte, North Carolina in 1979 and 1980. He came in, I told the story earlier. I was a Mid-Atlantic champion and wrestled him on TV for the belt, and he had a loaded boot. So he loaded the boot and kicked me, and boom, and he beat me, pulled my trunks, 1, 2, 3. So he's got the belt. So I'm coming back in a match with him on TV. So I wind up putting the sleeper on him. He goes down. I take off the boot. I go over to the announcer's table, and I'm trying to think of the guy's name who was the announcer, like Gene Okerlund. And I told him, I said, hey, I've got his boot. I'm going to win back the Mid-Atlantic title. So they booked a match between Khosrow and I in Roanoke, Virginia. So the deal was, I'm going to wrestle Kaz for the belt, and I'm going to wear his loaded boot. So we go in, and Sandy Scott, who was the brother of George Scott, who was the booker. George Scott was a booker in Charlotte at the time. So Sandy Scott comes up to me and he said, did George tell you the finish? And I said, no. I said, what is it? Yeah. And he says, well, he wants you to go an hour through with Khosrow. I said, what? He says, yeah. He said, full of people. I says, you got to be kidding me. I says, what does that do for a baby face if I've got his gimmick boot and I can't beat him in 60 minutes? Where does that put me in line for the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Championship? So we wound up having a match, and finally, after about 10 minutes, he says, Jim, you lead the match. So we had the match, and then, of course, the people were pissed off that I couldn't beat him in an hour. And so we had a double shot that night, and then we had the same match in Charlotte. And so we did 2-hour draws in one day. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, we were in some town, and I can't remember. It was just a spot show. And And George said, yeah, we want you and Cosro to do an hour draw again. And I said, oh my God. So we go through this match and we're having it's a spot show and people, it could have been 10 minutes, could have been 20 minutes, but I'm sure the people didn't want to watch this match for an hour. As neither did I. So during the match, Cosro said, oh, Jim, I hurt my back. My back's hurt. So he wound up going outside and they counted him out. So the next day, I get a call from George Scott and he says, I want you to come into the office. I want to talk to you. So I go into the office and he says to me, you were supposed to go an hour last night. And it was Franklin, North Carolina. And I said, yeah. I said, what's going on? I said, but Cosro hurt his back. And he told me his back was hurt. And then George says, well, Cosro was just in here and said, no, his back wasn't hurt. He said, you just wanted to go home early. I said, well, that's not true. So he said to me, you know what? He says, Jim, he says, I can't have you do this. I'm going to have to let you go. So he fired me. So I was sort of relieved in a way because I just, North Carolina was a great place, but, you wrestled every single day, twice on Saturday, twice on Sunday, never had a day off. Once again, it took a real strong family commitment to keep your family together there. Thank God my kids were, 3 and a year and a half old. And we had worked around everything and we had a nice little house there, wound up, selling the house and going back to Minnesota and had my best year ever. Matter of fact, I was just talking to Nick about that earlier, the fact that Jim Barnett, who was the owner really in Atlanta, had told me, he says, Jim, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd like to see what I could do on my own. But I said that the writing's on the wall. I said the best thing for me to do is to go back to the AWA and reunite with Greg Gagne. And he told me, he said, Jimmy, he says, I want to tell you this from the bottom of my heart. He says, if you go back to Minneapolis and Vern Gagne, that will be the biggest mistake you've made in your wrestling career. And I said, well, Jim, thank you, but I'm going to do it. So went back to Minneapolis. Greg and I reunited, and we had a record year working with Jesse Ventura and Adrian Adonis. And I made $85,000, which was my biggest year in the business. So it paid off, and Jim Barnett was wrong, and I was glad to get out of there. Long story made longer.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't like Greg Gagne. Was that just because he was the son of the promoter? Because I've met him a few times, and I actually like him and find him to be a nice guy, but I know it's different when you're working with a person.
Well, you got to realize, being the son of the promoter of a world champion, a guy who was, Vern had a dominant personality and he was not liked by any of his contemporaries. They were all jealous of him because here was a guy who came from nothing, was a 4-time, Big Ten champ, twice national champ, alternate on the Olympic team. And, he could go with anybody, and I think a lot of people resented that. And consequently, Greg never left the AWA. He went down to Georgia for 2 weeks. He and I went down there and we wrestled Bobby Orton and Dickie Slater a couple times. Had a hell of a match with those guys. And then he decided, he was going to be in Minnesota, never left. And consequently, people thought, well, Greg is slight of build, but Greg was a hell of a worker. He was a great worker, and he was good on interviews. And the only thing that was a definite problem was he was undersized. He only weighed like 208 pounds, dripping wet. And, that at that time, most of the heels that we were working with were over 250, to say the least. So it was hard to go, and Greg was content to stay in the AWA. And then when all the territories were falling apart because Vince was, stealing all the talent, and to be honest with you, the areas, the 26 different territories that were used to be there for wrestling, couldn't compete with the television production that Vince was showing. So consequently, there was only one place to, if you wanted to be a pro wrestler, better go to New York. So everybody did. So I was telling Nick earlier, there was 60 guys there when I was there in 1985. 60 guys. They ran 3 towns a night, 20 guys in the town. And when they put Brian Blair and I together as the Killer Bees, we wrestled 27 days a month for 3.5 years. That's only 3 or 4 days off a month. And that was horrendous. I mean, we flew a plane every single day. The money was good, but it was nothing compared to what it should have been. When I first went there, the first 3 weeks, I made, 4,200, 4,600, 5,000. I thought, holy smokes, this is the way it's going to be. It'll be wonderful. It'll be worth, the sacrifice. But then all of a sudden, it dropped down. It dropped down to, $2,000. And, you're working 7 days a week, week in, week out. And you think, holy Christ. So it really became a drag. And it was, consequently, there was a lot of, abuse, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, sex on the road. I mean, it was hard in the fact that you were, in order to, if you wanted to be a wrestler, this was it. This was your life from then on. So it was one of the problems you had to put up with. And look at all the guys that, lost their lives, ruined their lives, left their family, and they gave it up, because they wanted to pursue this crazy dream.
How was the sex on the road for you, or were you married?
I was married. Before it was, like anybody else, you red-blooded, baby face, and it was just like anybody else in entertainment. If you're on TV, you're popular, so consequently, there's always that opportunity.
On your Wikipedia, it says you were NWA Central States Tag Team Champions and 2-time Mid-Atlantic Tag Team Champions, but it doesn't say who you beat for the titles. Do you recall by any chance who you beat for the titles in those situations?
In Kansas City, it was Roger Kirby and Lord Alfred Hayes. And in the Mid-Atlantic, I was never a tag team champion. I was Mid-Atlantic champion twice. I beat Ray Stevens and Ken Patera. So,
and you mentioned you worked with Jesse Ventura in the AWA.
Yes.
Do you have any stories about him? He's, of course, one of the most successful wrestlers of all time.
Well, the thing that made Jesse was his interviews. He was an incredible interview. He had the look, but to be honest with you, he wasn't that skilled in the ring. He wasn't very athletic in terms of what you think a heel would be. Adrian Adonis was now just the opposite. Adrian was incredible to work with. He had great timing, took great bumps, and he and Jesse complimented each other for which one didn't, wasn't that good on the mic. Jesse made up for that, and Adrian made up for Jesse in the ring. So, and Jesse proved that when he went to New York. He had some problems with blood clots in his lungs, so he couldn't he couldn't fly as much as, we were flying every single day. And he was, you know, getting beat up with the best of us. So he wound up, taking a spot on TV, being an announcer, and did a great job. And then, lo and behold, he becomes the governor of Minnesota. And I saw Jesse, probably, it must have been early fall this year. And I had to go over to his house. Got a beautiful estate over in by Delwood, Minnesota. Real nice house, and saw him and his wife and talked to him. And he told me that he was still working for Russian TV, and that was it. He has a home in Mexico that he spends his winter in. So, he wound up doing very well, and made a lot of money and saved his money. So more power to him.
You feuded with the Hart Foundation when you were in WWE with the Killer Bees. Any memories
Yes.
of that, and the thoughts on the success that Bret Hart ended up having?
Well, Bret was always, he was a natural, and I loved working with him. Matter of fact, I had a match with him in two matches. One in the Philadelphia Spectrum, and it was a 20 or 30-minute draw, and I also had one with him in Madison Square Garden that were exceptional. And him and Neidhart were a good team, although Jimmy was so hard to work with because he was a little clumsy in the ring. And it was just harder to work with him because he had his own idea of what he wanted to do in the ring, and it might not coincide with what you thought would make a good match. In other words, he wanted to, get a lot of heat on you, not give you a comeback, and then beat you. So, needless to say, that doesn't work out very well for a good returning match.
No, not at all. And of course, you also feuded with Dory Funk when he was Haas Funk and Jimmy Jack Funk. What was it like working with a guy like Dory Funk?
Dory Funk was incredible. I mean, I worked with Dory and I worked with Terry. Dory Funk was exceptional. He reminded me so much of Nick Bockwinkel because they came from the same sort of era of wrestling heels, and just incredible timing in the ring. And I remember, I think it was in the late '80s, we did a pay-per-view down in Atlanta, and I was in a 6-man tag, and it was Wahoo, me, and I want to say Morocco against Dick Murdoch, and I can't remember who the other guys were. But in the later match, they had Dory Funk against Nick Bockwinkel, and they did a 30-minute draw, and they stole the show. These guys were so incredible. I mean, everything they did, was just, the timing was flawless, and everything told the story. And I told Nick afterwards, I said, and Nick was like, shit, Nick was 50 some years old then. And I said, and Dory was, close behind. And I thought, God, you guys just stole the show. They were great.
And what led to, or actually, before I get into that, I got to bring up, were you there for that Haku fight with Jimmy Jack Funk by any chance?
I was in the town, but I wasn't at the bar. But I knew what happened.
What happened? Did he actually get his eye ripped out? Because you always hear the story that Haku pulled his eye out.
He displaced his eye. It didn't come all the way out. What had happened was they were at the bar together and they were drinking, and they got in an argument about some ladies there. So Haku told Jesse, come on outside. And, Jesse was 6'3", 290 and a stout guy. So what happened was he wound up going outside, and the next thing you know, Haku picked him up, slammed him in between two cars on a curb, and then came down with his thumb into his eye socket and displaced his eye a little bit. And Jesse went into shock, and that was it. So they wound up, saving. I think Jesse's eye was saved, but he couldn't wrestle again for a long time if he did wrestle again. And they had to put his head on a board, and he had to, his head had to remain immovable for I don't know how many days, but they actually let Jesse go, and they suspended Haku for I don't know 2 weeks. But we were just talking about Haku earlier, and all the people I've met throughout my life, all sports, and I played college football, and I know a lot of players, that play in the NFL, and all the tough wrestlers. But honest to God, Haku, out of all the people I've ever met, was the baddest guy as far as fighting, because it wasn't a matter of fighting with him. It was a matter of life and death, because he there was no difference. I mean, he wouldn't stop unless his opponent was physically beat to a pulp.
Did you ever actually see him in action, or just hear those stories about his various encounters?
I saw him. I saw not him in action, but I saw him. We were at a bar that was Haku was, and this was in Cleveland, and Haku, Brian, and I, and we were at the bar, and it was a football player who was a wide receiver. I'm trying to think of his name now, but he had a bar. Webster Slaughter had a bar in Cleveland, so we went to the bar, and there was some Cleveland Browns in there, offensive linemen, and you could hear them chirping about, they knew that we were going to be in town the next day, or even that night. I think we were. Yeah, that's what it was. So they're wrestling this, wrestling that, and phony this and that. So Haku was drinking cognac and Coke, and he put his drink down, and he walked over to this table. And these guys were big kids. I mean, they were, probably in their 20s, and probably, 250 to 300 pounds. There was four of them. And he said to the guys, he said, fellas, he says, I know you're here for a good time just like we are. And he said, if I hear any more shit about pro wrestling, he says, there's going to be trouble. And he looked at him, and he didn't say another word. Haku walked back to the bar, and those guys didn't say one more word. So you could see, I mean, he was 6'3", 290 pounds, and he was, he could kick, a ceiling that was 7 feet high, and he was a born killer.
Now, you were in WrestleMania 3 against Volkov and the Iron Sheik. Any memories of that? A lot of people think of it as the greatest wrestling event of all time.
Well, it was, because it had sort of built to this crescendo of pro wrestling, and Hulk against Andre, and they built that up just perfect. And I think the fact that I never liked the finishes that they gave us in the WWF, and because they didn't mean anything. I mean, there was no, like traditional wrestling. Wrestling was part of a story where you'd have one match, and that match would lead to the next part of the story, and then to the next part of the story, and then it might culminate in a cage match, or whatever. And the match that we had with Sheik and Nikolai, what was supposed to happen was, during the end, we had had our match, and they got some heat on us. We made a comeback. I had them in a couple compromising deals, and then they cheated. And then Jim Duggan ran into the ring with the 2x4. So he runs into the ring with the 2x4, and he's clubbing, you know, Khosrow and Sheik, and the ref rings the bell and disqualifies us, and we're supposed to be happy that Jim Duggan came into the ring. And I said to Brian Blair, I says, my God, what a horrible finish that was. It was horrible, because where does that put us? We're supposed to be patting Jim Duggan on the back. He's coming into the WWE, but at our expense. They could have done something different, I think.
Is it true that there was a bunch of house shows at the Silverdome later on, and it was just up for smaller crowds? Do you have any recollection of that?
No, I don't. I don't remember going there again, because we used to go to Joe Louis Arena, and I think the Silverdome was. I think they wound up tearing that damn thing down. They built a new place, but we used to wrestle almost all the time at Joe Louis Arena where they played hockey. And I think that was once in a for WrestleMania. And they had 93,000 people. I still have the picture of that night. That was 8x10, and it was just. I still have it. And in there, they said it was 97,000, but I think it was 93,000. But still, that's a hell of a crowd.
I'm going to guess the payoff was good for that one.
10 grand. And they did $30 to $35 million on that show. So Hulk and Andre got $1 million apiece, and some of the guys got 150,000, I think. But the majority of the underneath card got 10 grand. So when you think of that, they probably paid, I don't know, 10 to 20% to the talent, and then they kept 80. But that's the way those promoters make money. Plus, they didn't pay us for 6 weeks. So what I had heard was they put that 35 million in a note for 6 to 8 weeks, gained interest on it, and then they paid the boys on the interest that it earned.
Clever.
I don't know if that's for true, but there was speculation that that's what they did.
Now, what led to Brian Blair leaving the WWE and the breakup of the team?
Well, here's what happened. They let a number of us go. They let Junkyard Dog, Don Morocco. I think they let Kenny Patera go, and then they let the Bees go. So I thought, well, Brian was ready to open up the Gold's Gym. He had 3 Gold's Gyms in Florida. And at that time in 1982, I opened up my own gym called Jumping Jim, Brunzell's Gym. And it was 5,000 square feet. I had $50,000 worth of equipment, and I had sunbeds, and I had a whirlpool, and I had the best steam bath in the cities. And I needed to still work. So when they let us go, Owen Hart, I remember, got hurt. So they called me and they said, can you work for him? And I said, sure. So I wound up working 2 or 3 years, just filling in. And then during the same time, they also had me do jobs on TV, which hurt me immensely. But I needed to work. So, Brian went on and was very successful with the gyms. And then I finally realized, after Vince had fired me 3 times and hired me twice, back. And then the 3rd time, that was it. So I left there and I just said, hey, that's it. I couldn't I wrestled independence for a couple of years, and I had on my 50th birthday in August. This is Campbell. I wrestled Jim Neidhart in Albert Lee, Minnesota, and during the course of that match, I just didn't feel like I could do what I used to do in the ring. So I said, "That's it." So on my 50th birthday, I just said, I can't do it anymore. I never did, never went in the ring again. Had many opportunities to still, you know, do independence, but I just couldn't do it anymore because my body was failing. And consequently, I've had 9 surgeries. I've had 6 surgeries on my knees. I've had both my knees replaced twice. I've had 2 shoulders surgeries on my left shoulder. I had my shoulder replaced. I had my hip replaced, and now I'm looking at having my right shoulder replaced sometime this summer. So, you know, I figured I had around 5,000 matches in 25 years. So, you know yourself after so many years in the ring, you you replace that cartilage with scar tissue, and then it calcifies, and you're in for a painful painful road ahead. So consequently, that's what's happened. And all the guys I know that have been, were in the business, 15, 25 years, they've all had replacements.
Now, I think the only pay per view they may have put you on during your singles run was Survivor Series 1988. Any memories of that?
God, I can't even remember which one that was. I remember in 1988, I think it was Sid Vicious. They were going to have a WrestleMania, and Sid Vicious was against Hulk, and it was in Indianapolis. I think that is where it was. So they had told me, we want you to come there just in case somebody gets hurt, somebody's sick, or somebody doesn't show. So I said, sure. So I went there, and I remember I was in the back room and everybody was there. And I can't remember. I think it was one of the TV people came up to me and said, Jim, you mind putting on your tights and bouncing around the ring so we can get our lighting down? And I looked at him and says, fuck you. He said, I'm not doing that. And I didn't. So I think that was the last time that although I did work, like I said, I did some jobs on TV. I had a hell of a match with Randy Savage, which is still on YouTube, which was a heck of a match. Matter of fact, he came off the rope and I hit him with a drop kick right in the mouth. And God, I bloodied his mouth. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. But he handled it, and he had Scary Sherry with him then. And actually, it was a pretty good match. It was a real good match. As a matter of fact, when the match was over, none other than Vince McMahon, as we came through the curtain, he says, that's the best TV match I've ever seen. And I know he was just blowing smoke, but sort of made me feel good after all that bullshit he put us through.
How did you find Randy Savage in the back? There's a lot of stories over the years that he was a little paranoid with Elizabeth and so forth, but it sounds like you had a pretty good relationship with him.
Well, I think Randy wanted to have a family. He saw my kids, and he was influenced by his dad, and his dad, came from that old school of wrestlers where you can't trust anybody, and you only can buy something that you can afford. So you never use a credit card. You buy with cash. Consequently, that's what Randy did, and I know he was overprotective of Elizabeth, and he was so thrifty. I mean, I remember somebody told me that he bought 2 cars, paid cash, and he had this little Cadillac that it was a two-door, and it was a hardtop, and I'm trying to think of the name of it. But he bought a couple of those, he paid cash, and then he bought a condo down in Florida, he paid cash. And that's just what his dad instilled in him. But he was a hell of a worker, and he was so light in the ring. It was hard to realize, the difference between him and Jim Neidhart was like the difference between heaven and hell. That's a hell of a compromise.
I know you probably never wrestled the Ultimate Warrior since you were usually a baby face, but did you have much interaction with him behind the scenes?
Well, Jimmy was a good kid. He was a certified chiropractor. And I found that out. And, like all of the guys on the road, you get bumps here and there, and you wanted to get adjustments. So wound up adjusting me a couple of times. And when he cracked my neck, I could feel all the way in my toenails. I mean, boom. And I felt bad for him because Vince was enthralled with his body. God, he just loved his body. But Jim could not work a lick. He couldn't work a lick. If he couldn't hit those ropes, there'd be nothing to the Ultimate Warrior. And consequently, I remember we worked it was South Dakota. I think it was Rapid City. So we have a match, and he's wrestling Andre. And the match lasts a minute and 20 seconds. And he winds up hitting Andre with 3 clotheslines coming off the rope and beating him in the middle. 1, 2, 3. And they didn't run Rapid City again because they killed the town. And that, I'll never forget the very first time I saw Jim Heltwig. It was in California. We were wrestling there, and I walked in and I saw this guy in a tank top, and I looked at him and I thought, Christ, I mean, his lats stuck out like huge steaks. I mean, they were like that on the side of, and I looked at him and I said, who was that guy? So that was my first introduction. This guy is Jim Heltwig, and lo and behold, little did I know, sooner or later, the next thing I know, he's working, and Vince tried to make another Hulk out of him, and there was just no way. And he was stiff, and he wasn't athletic, and he had an incredible body, but all he could do was shake those ropes.
Well, he made a lot of money, so I guess it worked for him. But you went to UWF after WWF, which Brian Blair, I think, was the booker of, and the controversial Herb Abrams ran it. Do you have any memories of that fiasco?
That was a fiasco. It was just, Herb, he was nuts. I liked him. He was a good guy. He was good to us, but he had no idea of what it took to, try to. I remember he booked MGM Stadium or inside the auditorium for matches that we had, and half the crowd was, it was a decent crowd, but they cordoned off half of it. But he just did things that were so outlandish, and then he tried real hard, but it just, if you don't have decent TV, and at that time nobody had TV like Vince, and I mentioned this many times, that the fact that he was allowed to, have the same sort of TV production that Dick Ebersol had showed him with Wide World of Sports. That's what created the WWF, is that television production that was second to none. I mean, the different cameras and the different angles and the fadeaways and all that stuff. I mean, that TV probably cost $250,000 a show, whereas your normal TV that they didn't in studios was probably $5,000. So there was just and this was the story that WWE. That's why they were so damn successful. Is not only did they have all the talent in the country, but they had the best TV production.
I know that you worked for WCW at their Slamboree pay-per-view at one point. Was there
Yes.
ever any talk of you coming on board there full time?
No. I'd worked in Atlanta before, and that was before, when I went up to Minneapolis after I left Charlotte, and that's when Jim Barnett told me I'd be making I was just tired of that whole Southern type of mentality in terms of their booking. They had a number of bookers. They were all the same, and they had the same ideas. And I wanted to get back home, period. So that's what it was.
There's a fan that wanted to know if you ever had any interaction with Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer over the years.
Yes, Buzz started in Charlotte. And I remember he came in, he was a good kid, worked hard, had a tough little body. He wasn't that tall, but he was muscular, and he attained a little bit of success. And personally, I didn't see him after that, but I heard that he had some substance abuse problems, and that took over his life, and consequently that ruined his career.
Did you ever witness any behind the scenes fights in wrestling, in dressing room or anything like that?
Yeah, I saw the fight between
Spivey,
Danny Spivey and Adrian Adonis in Flint, Michigan. And it was probably the most brutal fight I've ever seen, because it started in the ring, and Adrian had already, Danny was just starting out, and he was a big, 6'6", 260-pound guy, and lanky, and good with his fists. And Adrian, over a course of a couple of weeks, had worked with Danny many times and had sort of abused him. Consequently, Danny told Adrian, he says, "Hey," he says, if you're snug with me again and hurt me, he says, I'm gonna let you have it. Sure enough, Adrian had the sleeper hold on him real hard, and Danny gave him the office. Nothing happened, so Danny hit him with a couple elbows and turned around and whop, just blasted him and knocked him down with one punch. And he was out on his feet. So Bob Orton and I ran into the ring and said, Jesus Christ, come on. So we got them separated, and Adrian was he was out on his feet. So the next thing you know, Danny Spivey's in the babyface locker room, and he says, that son of a bitch, if he ever does that again, I'm going to kill him. And next thing you know, the door opens and Adrian comes in, and he starts to leg dive Danny, and Danny threw an uppercut. I'm honest to God, he threw an uppercut and hit Adrian right here, and lifted Adrian in the air about 3 feet. And Adrian came down like a big mullet, and his whole body hit like one big, his stomach, chest, his legs all hit at once. And he just went, and when he got up, you could see his cheekbone right through this part of his cheek, and he had a big cut over his eye where Danny had got him in the ring. And Danny wanted to keep going, and thank God there was about 4 guys there that said, "Hey, please don't, you don't want to kill him." And that was it. And Adrian was never the same after that.
There's a fan that wanted to know if you have any memories of Jerry Blackwell And how do you think he would have done in WWE?
Well, Jerry Blackwell was probably the best big man at that time. He was like 5'10" and 400 pounds, but he was agile. He could do a lot of stuff in the ring, and he had great timing, and he was smart. And he got over really good in the AWA, but it was because he was a, hillbilly from Stone Mountain, Georgia, that got him over. And he played that hillbilly type, hick and this and that, but I don't think he would have got over in the WWF because he didn't have the body. If you look back at the guys in the WWF during that 80s, mid 80s, there was very few guys that were really out of shape. I mean, and Jerry had a big derby on him, and it hung over his belt, and he just never would have made it. And Vince wouldn't have given him a try. Vince wanted that muscle bound, Mr. America look, and he wanted all the guys to be, rock solid and, like he is, like he wants to be, like he is. Have you noticed, Hannibal, that he looks like a silverback ape now? Have you seen his head?
Yeah, I haven't seen him that recently, but he definitely is a bodybuilder for sure. He's taken his share of supplements.
Oh Christ, yeah. He's probably taken so much growth hormone and any steroids. He's probably on the cutting edge of steroids. Between him and The Rock, they got it pretty well taken care of.
Yeah, I think The Rock probably can afford his own team of scientists to create the best.
If you make $155 million in 3 years, you're doing something right.
Yeah, for sure. Now, what do you consider your favorite both singles and tag team match of your career?
Oh, God. Singles match, Nick Bockwinkel, and which I had a couple hour draws with. I had a couple draws with Harley Race and 2 or 3 with Ric Flair. Bret Hart and I had a couple 30-minute draws that were great. But as far as tag team, the Harts were good. I would say in the AWA, Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens were incredible. So were Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens. And I don't know. Singles, as far as the guys who I thought were really great in the ring, and some I'd worked with and some I didn't. Jake Roberts was incredible. Bob Orton Jr. was incredible. Rick Steamboat was incredible. Nick.
Who's not incredible, Hannibal? You're not incredible. Once again, you've taken a client of mine's time and you've stretched it out and taken.
Where did you come from?
Don't worry.
Where did you come? What were you doing under this table? What were you doing under the table? How long were you under there?
I'm going to be Hannibal, and I'm going to be in Canada as soon as they open up the borders, and you're going to wish that I wasn't. You're going to wish we were in the pandemic part 2, because I'm done with you, Hannibal. Okay?
That would be a big mistake. You better hope I'm not back in Canada if you cross the border.
Hey, guess what? Hannibal, I've got a bunch of numbers. And you know what? One of the numbers I have up, it's got a Georgia zip code. It's got a Georgia area code. And his name may or may not be Abdul. That's all I'm saying.
He's not going to harm anyone these days. He's on his deathbed, but you better watch him out. You're going to see me one of these days. You're going to see me one of these days, and you're going to pay for this.
Yeah, we'll see about that.